Okay, Mr. Note Fogle, really great to have you on. I'm excited to talk about offline Bitcoin transactions and specifically how you sent a Bitcoin transaction pretty much through space, which is pretty amazing through a satellite. So you want to go ahead and start off with an introduction of who you are so we know?
Yeah, sure thing. My name is Nick Fogle. I've been a Bitcoiner since class of 2014, I guess. I lucked out that I missed the big bubble in 13, and have been riding it out ever since. I was also on the founding team of Casa. These days, Casa is purely focused on the multi-sig product. Keys.casa is where you find that. But back in the day, I helped build the first Casa node as well. So we can definitely talk about that if you want to.
Cool, nice, okay. And what are you currently doing now? Just real briefly, I'm curious.
Yeah, I'm also a SaaS business founder. So I guess about 5 years ago, I founded a company that helps podcasters turn their audio into video. It's called Wave. And I sold that business back in March. So that's been really nice to have had a successful exit.
Yeah.
I also was able to leave. I left Casa to focus on some other pursuits, and recently started another SaaS company called Turnkey, which we help businesses optimize the revenue and reduce losses through reducing churn.
Very cool. All right. So let's dive into the philosophy of why, because it's not an easy thing to do. What you did is, you have to buy the device that can take that transaction information and send it up to space. It's a very technical thing, and it probably took some work. So what made you want to do this in the first place?
Yeah. So my background is not originally was not technical. I've always been kind of a nerd and loved computers, but growing up, I'm 34, so going through high school and college, like there just wasn't this idea that a software engineer or computer scientist could make tons of money. So that was never on my radar. I was like, okay, I'm going to go to college. I studied economics, and then I went to law school. Hated it, and kind of got back to my technical roots, and have always been a tinkerer. I would always tell people I'm more of a hacker than a traditional computer scientist. I like to figure out how things work and kind of reverse engineer them and then put it back together again.
Right.
And that works out. That's worked out pretty well in the software field for me, even in like traditional jobs. But back to this satellite node that I created, there was a precursor project to that. I'd started playing around with Raspberry Pis back in 2015 or 2016 to actually use it for a Bitcoin node. Back then I was shitcoiner still too, so I tried to do an F node. You definitely couldn't do a Ethereum node.
Every Bitcoiner had their shitcoiner days. That's why they turn into Bitcoiners.
That's right.
Yeah.
You got to do it. And that's why I try to spare people now, but they've got to learn it the hard way themselves. So
yep.
Anyway, yeah, funny early experience trying to run an Ethereum node. It's such a joke now on a Raspberry Pi. It was even hard with a Bitcoin node back then, though, because the devices were so underpowered. So I couldn't get the Bitcoin node quite working on the Raspberry Pi, but this was when, do you remember when Pokemon Go was like really popular and everybody was like running outside like crazy, trying to catch Pokemon? Well, I found a way to run a Raspberry Pi around the clock and actually hack, like a bunch of us reverse engineered the Pokemon Go API keys, and were able to write a bot that like amassed this giant collection of Pokemon for you automatically.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, I got banned, but oh man, I've got a blog post somewhere with my collection. I had like not just like the best Pokemon, but it was like the ultra rare attributes on like the best. It's great. So I got really adept at tinkering with Raspberry Pis and these little boards as I was working on some of these bots. And as we think more about this idea of something being resilient and resistant to things like grid going down, I live in an area that is very susceptible to hurricanes. So almost every fall, we've been lucky this year, there is a threat like, hey, go board up the windows and everything. And then we usually evacuate inland 2 or 3 hours. And then it's like, wondering, hey, what's going to happen back home? And one fall in particular, I was like, oh, we're gonna have to evacuate. And like the police were coming to my house and like with the megaphone saying, please leave, please leave. So I was like, all right, I want to just, I want to know when it's safe to come back. So I'm going to create this bot. It's going to check the power and a couple of other things using a Raspberry Pi. And I create a Twitter account for it. I just call it Power Checker Twitter account. And it got like following, and like the local news picked it up, and people were like watching this little Power Checker tool I created. And it was like the first thought I had was like, wow, this would be a cool service to have really anywhere that could just tell you like what's the health of what I'm doing, where I am. So this is a lot of backstory, but it helps you to kind of understand the evolution of where I'm coming from with this. So back to 2017, I joined the founding team at Casa, and we were working on multi-sig security for Bitcoin, but we also love this idea of the home node and having this idea of your home, your domicile, your casa is this sovereign space, and you have your own node and you validate your own transactions. And people were not that interested in nodes back then. I mean, it really wasn't like a thing at all.
Yeah.
We actually created, really the first version it was pretty rough, and we sent it out to like 12 angel investors and VCs. But it was pretty cool. It was the same idea though, kind of thinking about that power checker tool. Jeremy had some really brilliant ideas around this home node that would, work and, check in with you and ping for transactions and things like that. So as we continue developing the node at Casa and working on the Lightning Network and other things, I start thinking about, man, like what are ways that this could be more resistant? And I think I'd heard Szabo, it was Andreas. Somebody was talking about moon bounce.
Yeah, I think, I know Nick Szabo did a presentation at Stanford in 2017, I think, about weak signal frequency, sending Bitcoin transaction through weak signal. And then what was the other one you mentioned?
I don't know if it was Andreas or maybe it was, what's Elaine's last name? She and Szabo may have co-presented that.
That was the one at Stanford that I mentioned. Yeah, okay. I know Andreas has a presentation called, what's it called? Something... Oh, I forget it. But Andreas talked about something similar where data can be sent through different means other than the
this
internet.
idea that you've got basically a ham radio with a strong antenna, and you can bounce a train. I think NVK might have done this or talked about it too. Yep. Bouncing it off the moon, and then somebody else on Earth can receive it. Which is, to me, that's like the ultimate badass thing to do.
It is. Yeah, I believe so. I think it's called, because I learned this in the Marine Corps, actually. I did some radio stuff in the Marine Corps, which is kind of where my interest lies. But I believe the official term is called the ionosphere. And pretty much like, you can theoretically send anywhere on Earth and send certain data all the way up in the sky, and it bounces off the sky back down to Earth, which is, yes, absolutely badass and mind-blowing.
Yeah, well, I want to, if anybody is listening and can add this to the comments or whatever, or ping me on Twitter, I would love to know what Bitcoiner tried this. And I would also love to do it. I would love to buy the tools to make that happen, just because I think technically you need a radio operator's license. I think I might go pirate radio on it and just try it once.
Yeah.
That would be cool. But so I'm researching all these like things, and there are a lot of people in Bitcoin forums from back in the day talking about like satellite, how cool would that be? This is right around the time that Blockstream announced their satellite. So this was the first announcement back in 17, and their satellites are in higher Earth orbit. So there are positives and negatives to that. There's like issues with coverage. I don't necessarily need to get into all the key topics and everything, but the problem I had with that for my purpose was I wanted something that had a small form factor. I didn't want to have a dish. I didn't want to have all this like complicated setup and everything. I wanted something simple that could use satellite. I was thinking about like, I don't know, like military use cases where you've got a phone, a sat phone, and you're able to talk to somebody else with a sat phone. So I was like doing basic research, and I was like, oh, there's something called Iridium. And I learned all about Iridium. Iridium is like a really, really cool project. If you look into it, I think there's like 60 or 70 Iridium
66 satellites up in sky. Yeah, largest. Okay. I believe it's the largest satellite network. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe Elon is trying to like I don't know a lot about his network, but I assume it's trying to displace that with high powered internet. I would also be curious if, I think it's called Starlink, right? I'd be curious if that's taking away from Iridium's market. Because I know Iridium has some big government contracts, right? Like in the military, you guys were probably piggybacking on Iridium's network.
I don't remember learning about it, but I'm sure. I mean, it would not surprise me. It would make sense.
Yeah, it's just cool, and you can see them fly over too. I mean, they're low enough where if you know to look for them, you can actually see them in the sky. They fly at, I mean, it's crazy fast, but they're high enough where you can see them move across in an arc. But it's super slow, and that's the challenge. Is you've got this network that covers the whole Earth. Like that's the difference between this and blockchains now improve their coverage, but at the time, I wanted a small form factor and I wanted to be able to be anywhere. I live on the coast, so the idea of like being out in a boat or like putting this device I made out in like a little bubble craft and just sending it out in the ocean and letting it just do its thing. Those kind of experimental thoughts were really interesting to me. So I wanted something that could broadcast from anywhere. And the challenges though with Iridium is it's like way slower than dial-up internet, and there are other issues about like place, like where it needs to be placed. It needs to be, you need to be able to see the sky and some other things like that. But for the most part, I looked at Iridium as like, this is the best technology that I can use to fit my needs of a small form factor that works anywhere on Earth.
So to zoom out a bit, the motivation for doing this, I'll give some context. I just finished a presentation that I mentioned with you earlier called "Can Bitcoin Survive an Apocalypse?" And the internet has been used to censor people in the past. It was used in Egypt, and Myanmar still doesn't have internet. They haven't had internet for like 2 years. It's over 1 million people who don't have internet access. It's been used in the United States 10 years ago for a protest. So, anyways, you know, internet can be used against people. That being said, somewhere on Earth, some Bitcoiners are going to have internet where they're mining and keeping the network alive, of course. But individually, there have definitely been cases where nation states have used this against their own people. So, was that kind of was that part of your motivation as far as the censorship
that was
resistance to internet, attacks?
That was part of it. I mean, and just some background to like other background too. So I think I've given a solid technical background of like why I chose what I chose and why it was like a natural progression for me to like build this thing. But more from like my own philosophy and like how I see the world and how I think about the world. I have like a high distrust of people and particularly authority. I think most Bitcoiners share that because they've been burned somehow. Like I grew up and my father had a drug problem. So immediately, like if anybody comes from a household where you have a parent with alcoholism or a drug problem, that erodes your trust in any figure that's going to be there to catch you. So you never have this concept of a safety net. It's I have to take care of myself. Nobody is coming to my rescue. So I think that was like embedded deeply within my mind from an early age. But I still trusted these like institutions and like the wisdom of the older generation, like go to school. So, I go to school, make good grades, work hard, study, graduate early. September of 2008, I'm interviewing with Bank of America with my economics degree. Bankers destroyed the economy. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll go to law school now. And funny thing about going to law school is like, well, number one, the legal recession just was delayed by a few years. So I graduated into like a new recession for lawyers. But once you've been immersed in the legal profession, you really start to think about the rule of law differently. Granted, like I'm not saying I don't respect rule of law, but you do ask different questions about how laws are made, how laws are enforced, how laws are interpreted, and how they can be bent. So all of this like background, I think, explains kind of why I see like power is going to corrupt people. People can't be trusted.
Logical. Yeah.
Like and when you think about centralized authority, people are fallible and they're going to either through intentional misconduct or mistakes, things are going to go wrong, shit's going to hit the fan. And I don't see this as like a huge threat to Americans, but I see it as big threats elsewhere. And we're seeing this right now. I mean, we're seeing it every couple of months, there's a new country that bans Bitcoin or flip flops and goes back to banning it. So back in 2017, China had just done one of their big bans too. So a lot of this stuff was in kind of in the back of my mind as I was working on it.
Yeah. It's something we definitely have to have in mind constantly as Bitcoiners, because if this thing actually succeeds, which you and I and many people believe that it will, and are staging our bets that it will, many governments are not going to be happy about it. And the idea that they're not going to try and stop it in some way, they're definitely going to try. So I think having a slight level of paranoia healthy paranoia can be a good thing for us creating this network to be robust and where it can still stay alive through attacks. So I think that's real important.
Kind of the whole idea of adversarial thinking. Like, I am somebody that I'm hopeful, but I'm a pessimist. So I expect the worst from people, but I also have optimism about the collective future. And I think Bitcoiners tend to fall in that same camp where, and particularly maximalists. And I think this week people were like freaking out about maximalists or something, but I think maximalists they take that to, the nth degree of like, I don't trust you. I'm going to yell at you. I'm going to like publicly point out, whatever you're doing is a scam. But I do think that's a commonality I see through most people that are Bitcoiners.
Yeah, like distrust of authority or, I mean, once you learn about how the Federal Reserve was created and the fact that it was passed 2 days, the Federal Reserve Act was passed 2 days before Christmas. These people, it's a private organization. They can create however much money they want without being audited ever. It's like, come on, how do you not?
How do we not learn about this? Right? I mean, this is one of the most core influences on our economy. And I studied economics in school and was a very active, engaged learner. And I sought out information when I didn't understand. I had no idea that the organization was formed in the way that it was, and right. A lot of like the backdoor dealings and things that have come out from like people like Nick Carter and others have talked a lot about, even Bretton Woods and the petrodollar recently. Those are great. There's a great podcast. I think it was on What Bitcoin Did podcast where they talk about the petrodollar. But like the whole system is like, oh wow, like 10 people in a room are deciding the fate of our monetary system.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. It's absolutely nuts that a few people can just make decisions for millions of people compared to Bitcoin where nobody's making for decisions for each other.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's I don't know if you have any other comments to make, but if we're good on this, I would like to dive into kind of the more technical side of sending a Bitcoin transaction offline through satellite.
Yeah. I'll just say that I think for like just background on this project, if you are super technical, you can probably find a better way to do this. And I've got a blog post out there that breaks down a lot of the technicals. But this was a weekend project, like the month after my son was born. So it was like the bare margins of time to do this pet project. And it actually like worked. And I was amazed that it worked with the short margins of time that I had. But I would love to see some Bitcoiners pick this up and improve the form factor. I mean, we've got guys 3D printing some of the coolest stuff. So if anybody is listening and wants to improve upon the project, I can send over source code and things like that and help guide it. I just don't have a ton of bandwidth right now to improve it.
Right on. Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that. Yeah, that would be this has to be continued. It's too cool to not be continued and too important. So
it's like the little like display too. It was so cypherpunk at the time for something that was like, I mean, I didn't fabricate any of my own chips. I just ordered Raspberry Pi parts offline basically. So yeah, we can jump into it.
Yeah. So, okay. So I'm going to paint a picture. Let's say, we have a horrible situation, apocalypse type situation. The internet gets shut down. The power grid goes down. And here you are, you're this, let's say you're a smart Bitcoiner who has that healthy level of paranoia, and you have solar powered batteries, and you have the ability to charge something and send this transaction. So, as far as that situation, how exactly would that work, right? Let's say you have some sort of solar powered battery that you can charge the Iridium device
Yeah.
with. And can you kind of walk us through?
Yeah. So the device itself, just to give you and you can probably include this in the show notes, just link to the post with some images. But um, if you can imagine just kind of like a calculator display, right? Like a super simple little strip that's going to give you a display of what's happening. So that's kind of the interface we're dealing with here. It's super simple, 3 little push buttons. And under that, imagine that that's sitting on top of the little display. Under that is a Raspberry Pi. If you haven't seen a Raspberry Pi before, it's a little board with processors and chips on it, and it can fit in the palm of your hand. And then nested right below that is a portable power supply for the Raspberry Pi. Now, a Raspberry Pi can be power hungry, so you can configure it to use less energy. And I did that with this device, so it would last longer. I got about 2 hours of charge out of it. And these are little lithium ion, not like the Duracell 2A. This is something you would buy. It looks like an old cell phone battery when you had like the old Nokia smartphone that would kind of flip out.
I was too young for that, but yeah,
I
I
don't
believe
think
you.
like, did you ever have a cell phone you could remove the battery from?
Uh,
Or have you always had one that was like built in? You got to take the whole thing apart.
no, my first one, I'm thinking back on it. First one, I had one where you could take the battery out, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So that idea, right? It's like that kind of like lithium battery that's in like plastic, and you can get those on Amazon super cheap. So if you wanted to have a stack of those, you could do that. It's rechargeable as well, and it can also be used as a uninterrupted power supply (UPS). And if you have your own home node and you wanted something like that for backup, you could do that as well. But I was using it as a primary power supply. So that gives you an idea of what it looks like if you're listening and don't have the visual in front of you. Calculator style display, very simple, on top of a fist size device called a Raspberry Pi. And right below that is a battery. That's really all there is to it. One other difference is a SD card. So just like the camera SD card, which is going to store all of the software.
Got it. Okay. And so let's say all of that stuff is hooked up. Maybe walk us through the actual, like, where is this data going? How does this work, right? Because really,
Yeah.
I'll let you kind of go through it, but to me, it's just you are sending a certain frequency in the air up to the satellite, right? And then it receives the information, sends it back down. Maybe you can describe a little more.
Yeah. So let's talk about the node itself, right? So, and it's not a node in the sense it's a full node. I'm thinking of it as a node on a network of like other satellite nodes.
Okay.
So the device itself is Raspberry Pi. It's got a little display on it. It's got the rechargeable battery. One key component is a modem. Now, if you remember modems from like the dial-up era, this is a special modem that can talk to the Iridium network. I bought one from a company called I think the company's called Rockblock, or maybe it's just the device that's called Rockblock. But it's a Iridium Rockblock modem, and I have all the specs on the blog post if you want to buy this exact same thing. And it just plugs right into the Raspberry Pi with some cables. It's very easy to set it all up. So once that's plugged in, I load this device with software, put the software on the SD card. So when you boot it up, it's like ready to send a transaction. And there are little buttons on that calculator style display that can sign a transaction, broadcast a transaction, and push it to the network. Now, the first thing you're going to communicate with when you actually push a transaction, you're going to send this packet of data up to one of these satellites that's overhead. And again, remember there are 66 of them. They're flying at like 17,000 miles per hour. But you have entire global coverage. That's the cool thing about this network. So you're going to be able to pretty much reach something as long as you've got a clear sky like overhead. You can't do it inside. You can do it near a window, but it'll past that transaction, the signed transaction that's ready to broadcast, it'll push it to the satellite network, and that will send it to a ground station. And the ground station is where you can have other software that actually handles the transaction itself and gets it to the Bitcoin network. So you need this, I call it like a relay service. So you do have to have this relay service that can receive the data and then broadcast it to the network. Now, you could, presumably you could get it to other satellites using a different satellite network. But based on the way Iridium works, this is the way it works: is device goes to the satellite overhead, and then that sends it to a ground station that can broadcast it out to the rest of the network. And this could be anywhere on Earth too, which is the other thing that's resilient. Is you could have them on different continents, you could have them in different regions on each continent, whatever.
Got it. So when that Bitcoin transaction information is sent from the satellite to the ground station, how does that information get processed in the Bitcoin network? Do you know what I mean? Do you understand the question?
You're saying how does the Bitcoin network receive that?
Yeah.
So let's talk about the relay server, because that's a key component, but it also introduces a weakness here. I just used Amazon's EC2 instance to create like a virtual server. And the cool thing about that, though, is you can use different regions. So you could put one in the Ireland data center, one in Northeast Virginia, one in like Melbourne or something. So you have failover. You can push to different regions and have this different ground station. One other thing I neglected to mention too, Bitcoin transactions are longer than the total message size Iridium allows. So like you think about, have you ever seen a signed like a raw Bitcoin transaction that's like ready to broadcast?
Yes, am I off, or is it like 250 bytes of information?
It depends. It can be about that size, or it can be larger. If it's a multi-sig, for instance, it's going to be larger.
Okay.
So you do hit these limitations where it's like, Rockblock and the Iridium network can't handle this much data in one send. So this relay server is really important. You've got to have it. I had it in multiple regions, and it basically takes multiple relays. And once the Bitcoin transaction is assembled, so let's say it sends it in two parts, it's going to put this thing back together, and then it's going to broadcast it to the network. And there are a lot of APIs out there you can just use, like public APIs that you can use to help you push a transaction. You don't need to write your own code for this. It's pretty much a API for every language. And there's also like services like Blockstream that actually has a web interface where you can push a raw transaction that way as well.
Yeah, I've seen Blockstream's one, which is pretty cool. Yeah, I'm thinking like right now for the average person listening, they're not going to be able to just do this on like the average person probably won't be able to do stuff like this. Like somebody's grandma, isn't going to buy an Iridium device and do all this stuff. So thinking into the future, and I just being totally honest, it's not fun to admit but if all, let's say some horrible thing happened and all the internet went down in the United States for like 24 hours or something, it would be a really bad situation. Bitcoin would still be alive, which is extremely impressive, but I wonder where this could go in the future. I'm even thinking of things like, let's say we establish our own Citadels and the internet goes down there. What would the redundancy look like? What kind of products are going to be made to where people they don't have to do all this technical stuff. They can just plug it in, send Bitcoin in case there's, an internet outage. It's pretty exciting to think of where this could go in the future to make it easier for the average person.
I've got some ideas around that too. So there are satellite phones. Like you could get a Iridium phone and do something like this from the phone itself. Like I think you could probably use an SD card, and maybe you'd have to use some custom software, but you could actually send this as a text message. There are services out there that allow you to send Bitcoin transactions as like a text message.
I've seen that. I know Pavel Rusnak, co-founder of what is it?
Treasure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So you can basically take the transaction info, send it through an SMS, like a text message.
Yeah.
But you should do that through a satellite phone.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, they're just sending data, right? So like a satellite phone can call like a regular phone if you think about it. it just uses, so there's a pathway that it has to use. So like a cell service, it's going to use a cell tower to broadcast. And this would have to do like Iridium satellite to a ground station to a cell tower or something like that. It resolves it. I don't know exactly how it resolves the communication there, but I know that it's possible.
Yeah.
One thing too to point out while we're on the topic, this is something that's interesting, but you can surveil satellite communication. There's like a great talk at DEF CON where they're talking about surveilling and picking up on communications that were made via satellite. I think I just always assumed like, oh, satellite must be the most secure way to do it, because you watch TV and you see like the president on a satellite phone or something.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily the case. Like you could have a dedicated like DoD, I assume, has these dedicated satellites that are only for military communication, and things are encrypted over that. But by default, Iridium isn't going to encrypt your data. So if somebody was like able to listen in and capture that frequency, they could do it. Again, though, we're not talking about. So we're talking more about resistance to a grid going down, rather than like obfuscating through censorship. And I think Blockstream's service is maybe a little better for like the censorship resistance. This is more designed as like a portable, like shit hits the fan into the world as we know it. I've got to get out of my country with my portable device. I don't know about power or cell service, but I'm going to be able to send and receive Bitcoin through this. So
yeah, no, I got it. That makes sense. I know it's illegal to send. I believe it's illegal to send encrypted data over ham radio. I could be wrong, but I believe that's the case. I don't know. I wonder how we would work through that. I hope we're never in that situation in the first place. But
so I think that's where like the mesh network comes in handy, and having like relays. I was thinking, I think his name is Richard from Gotenna. When I was at CASA, we were actually looking at collaborating, and then our roadmaps got kind of crisscrossed and we weren't able to work on it. But we're working at like a mesh Tenna connection for the CASA node. And I love this idea of having like, you've got like a Iridium endpoint, and mesh is geographically constrained, right? Like if you're in New York, that's awesome. Like you've got all these people around, but how do you hop from New York to Miami? Well, that's where it'd be really cool to have like a central Iridium or satellite broadcasting system on each mesh network, so that you could make these longer hops. Something like that would be a way to avoid censorship, I think, if you were encrypting it prior to sending and then decrypting after. There are a lot of really cool things you could do, and then send between the Citadels.
Yeah, that is really cool, actually. So, because the way I've thought about it is like after talking with Coinsure, because he's got, I believe, the longest Gotenna transaction to record, is eventually the Gotennas would have to reach an internet access point to broadcast that transaction to the whole network. But even if you don't have that internet access point, under what you're saying, you could have a Citadel using mesh networks, and then an Iridium point that those transactions reach, and then that just broadcasts everything to the satellites and then to the internet. So you don't even need internet connection near you.
Yeah, no, and the thing that you constantly come up against with this whole question though is centralization. Like you rely on a centralized source to cross large geographic boundaries where people and devices can't come up with that. Even something like Blockstream, like I love the idea, like you need that one that one system that can get the Blockstream satellites. But what if they say like the government say, we hate Bitcoin, we're going to blast these guys out of the sky, and they shoot all the satellites down. Then you have to use commercial satellites. So
yeah, that's true.
That have a mixed use case, and I don't think that's a valid criticism for Blockstream, because they're not. It's not. Those aren't like dedicated Blockstream satellites. There are other commercial uses there. So
right,
other people would be pissed if that happened. But if there was like, let's say something happened, in the like in low Earth orbit or even higher orbit, that a lot of satellites fell apart, then there are other ways of doing this. I've even heard of people like the message in a bottle transaction. Have you seen some of these on? I think it's like Mule Tools.
With who? Rubles. I've seen Sneakernet stuff. I know Rudolfo Novak did a presentation on stuff like that.
Not
put it with a bird.
I didn't say Grubels, although that's funny because it sounds just like what I did say. Mule, like MULE. That's a hard word to say. Mule Tools.
Yeah, I know them. Yeah.
They've got like a list of things, and they have like a Morse code, like the MeshNet. I think they have fax, satellite hookup, SMS relay, Bluetooth. There's just so many different communication protocols you can use, and that's what I think that's what we're getting at here. What is so beautiful about Bitcoin is literally any method or any technology that has existed or that can exist for moving data, moving radio waves, like that can be co-opted and used for Bitcoin.
It's so cool.
And that's what makes Bitcoin so much more interesting to me. Like, how many people on Ethereum right now are thinking about this kind of stuff?
Yeah, no one. They're talking about
how do we get off of Infura and our like super difficult nodes, or how do we shrink our supply now that we've got hundreds of millions and we don't know our total supply. Bitcoiners are thinking about these problems like way before they come in advance, and that's why the FUD is hilarious. Is because it's like I see this all the time too on Twitter. It makes me so mad. I don't even respond. But these guys are like, "What do you do when the power goes out or when quantum computing happens?" And it's like, guys, like you really are like really so clueless and haven't done the slightest bit of research. Because if you do, like, it's so clear that there's a lot you can do here.
There's that saying, the more you study the network, the more confident you are in it. And, I just think it's so true. Like the more time you put in studying Bitcoin, the more you realized how insanely robust this network is. And Bitcoiners, like you mentioned, people on Ethereum are not talking about what if the grid goes down and how can I send a transaction through satellites in space? Like
exactly. They're like, how do we decongest the network? Because so many people are sending crypto kitties or whatever the crazy NFTs are they're using these days. It's like this is a serious protocol for serious money and people that actually
want to keep it alive
on it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think another factor of this too is just a large amount of people on Earth don't even have access to internet as well. I know in parts of El Salvador, that's been brought up as an issue, and things like this, even if you're not thinking like I'm going to go live in the woods in my Citadel and send an offline Bitcoin, even if you're not thinking about that, like I can picture a way to turn this into a legitimate company where you go to people who don't have internet and then you set these things up and hey, there you go, you can now have a Bitcoin economy. So
I have a friend who works in it's a company called Water Mission. My wife worked there a long time ago too, but they go to places. It's kind of like charity water where they dig wells and stuff, but these guys are a lot more around like the microeconomies and helping to actually like they'll build systems around like the water treatment they set up. There's like a whole circular economy that they build there. And I heard this a little bit with I think it's Jeff Ross talking about moving Bitcoin miners to where the energy is, to where and building like little economies around that. And I just love that idea of how you can use Bitcoin to incentivize behavior that is desirable for society.
Yeah.
Whereas fiat really only encourages behavior that is desirable in the short term for society, rather than building long, sustainable economies.
100%.
It's really about how do we prevent a recession this year, and how do we like deliver dopamine hits to keep our citizens happy for the next 6 months.
Yeah. It's almost like fiat. Well, one of the main differences between human beings and animals is our ability to plan for the future and sacrifice immediate gratification for having something better in the future. And fiat currency just totally reverses that core human difference and almost incentivizes animal-like behavior. And that's why society, every time the currency is about to collapse, the society loses their morals, loses their traditions. Like it's just all going downhill. So it's a really beautiful thing that Bitcoin, like the term HODL has a philosophical meaning to it. Like I'm not going to just satisfy what I want now. I'm going to plan for my future and make something of myself.
Totally. And the other thing, those are attributes that are lacking in society right now. And you look at things like diet, even I had dinner with Safety and a few others like 4 years ago. And he was the first person I ever met that was a like carnivore, and he said, he's carnivore. I don't know if he actually used that word, but Locke was later like, yeah, he's a carnivore. He only eats meat, and I couldn't believe it at first. And I met more and more Bitcoiners who were either keto or carnivore. And last year I was like, man, I've gained so much weight during lockdown. My diet is shit. And it was like the night before my son's birthday. And I've always had like an addiction to sugar. And I ate like half the cupcakes for his birthday without even thinking about it. I was like, what is wrong with me? And I was like, okay, I'm going to cut out sugar and go like full hardcore like keto. And I have been ever since. And for me, it's helped me to see why Bitcoiners tend to favor like carnivore and keto, is because you feel great long
Yeah, you do.
term. It can be painful because you're delaying this dopamine hit. You're saying no to sugar. You're saying no to things right now. But over the long term, you feel so much better, and you are so much healthier. I think for me, I see so many parallels. Like the more I get to know other Bitcoiners, and you see the morals and like the philosophy and diet, nutrition, family life, you see a lot of these parallels where you're optimizing for the longer term and willing to endure short term pain for what's coming later.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I love like Bitcoiners are, yeah, that's my people for all those reasons. I mean, we're all pretty much ideologically aligned. We believe in freedom. We want to prosper in life. We have family values. All that stuff is, and yeah, the diet thing too. I mean, same thing with me, the carnivore diet. I've been eating a lot more
Are
meat.
you full carnivore?
I'm not full carnivore. Well, I mean, I mainly just eat meat and fruit, and I
Okay.
feel very good. I mean, I got interested in the vegan philosophy, and I can understand that because meat factories are absolutely horrible, and that's a tough thing,
Yeah.
But I do believe that human beings need to have meat. Personally, I feel so much better when I'm eating a lot of good, high quality meat, you know, and we've been, we talked about the morals of society. We've also been separated from having that connection to the animal. Like Native American tribes used to thank the animal and for its
Right.
life, and there's really something to that, And it's also, you got to think like the quality of meat. If an animal is running around all day, it's outside drinking natural water. It's a much different source of food than something that's been living its life in a cage. So
It's consumerist mentality, right? When you don't think about what you're eating, it's here, I'm going to consume it. There's no thought about like what went into this. And I think that's also an interesting way to look at things is you know this consumerist fiat mentality where it's what can I get right now to make me happy in this moment
yeah.
versus like what would be better long term.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. So, um, well, I'd love to hear about, what you're doing right now in business and how you're involved in the Bitcoin space. What
Yeah,
projects you have going on now or in the future or
yeah. I'm kind of like a light version of Michael Saylor, I guess, where for several years throughout the bear market, um, I was working like crazy at Casa to build that company. Um, I think I built I think I worked on like every single project that Casa still has today. So it was a very gratifying company, amazing people there to work with. Definitely love my time there. But I reached a point where it was like I've got this other business that is growing like crazy during the pandemic, and I need to sell it. And there was also this idea of like I can sell this business and convert a lot of the proceeds to Bitcoin. Kind of when you sell a business, you're basically bringing future profits forward into now. And I love that idea, bringing all those future profits forward and being able to convert a lot of that into my own little Bitcoin treasury. So now I did start another company. I'm starting companies with what I know and what's worked well. And Turnkey is this new company for SaaS businesses to make their businesses run better. And my thought here is let's build another company, grow it, make it profitable, and reinvest profits in a better unit of account, which is Bitcoin.
hell yeah, absolutely. You accept Bitcoin, I assume.
Well, we don't have anybody that is using Bitcoin right now for payments. If somebody offered to pay us in Bitcoin, I would do it.
Sure. Yeah.
I'll
That
tell
was
you,
that was the question. You would be able to. Yeah.
I'll tell you this. So we are really focused around Stripe. Are you familiar with Stripe? Stripe is a massive payments platform. Pretty much all online businesses these days use Stripe as kind of the plumbing for their transactions, because it's super hard to get affiliated with a network and become one of these payment gateways. So Stripe, I mean, they're going to be like the biggest company ever when they go public, if they ever do. So we focus on businesses that use Stripe and helping them to retain as much money as possible. But the reason I bring that up, Stripe used to accept Bitcoin. And I don't exactly remember why. I think it just wasn't being used enough on the platform. And I'm just praying that those guys bring Bitcoin back, because I've got so many, like I know the Stripe API and that infrastructure so well. I've got like 20 business ideas, the things I want to build using that Stripe API. So I hope they bring that back. And if they do, it's going to be super easy to accept it. Otherwise, I'm going to have to spin up my BTC Pay server here on my Umbrella node.
Yeah.
And get a payment.
Nice. I know I don't know if you've heard of the company Oshi. You ever heard of Oshi? It's like basically, you may have seen it on Twitter. It's like a Groupon rewards, but for Bitcoin. And they also help, Bitcoin. They help businesses start integrating Bitcoin. They can do it with online businesses too. I think it's a really kind of interesting.
That's cool.
Topic. Yeah. So they may be worth looking into. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll have to check them out.
Yeah.
I set up our Bitcoin, our BTC Pay server at Casa, and the whole like commerce website. So I'm like, I love that project. I love how easy it is to set that up. And since Casa had for business reasons, had to stop building the node, it's really, really hard to make a commercially viable node product, because hardware is expensive. Lots of things can fail. Supporting it's difficult. But the guys at Umbrella have done an amazing job taking some of that code that we build and doing their own thing with it too. That project's so far along, and it's so easy to set up BTC Pay server on that now. It's like really, really impressed with what they've done. And if any listeners are on the fence about running a node, it's the easiest way to get started, I think, with your own home node. Have you tried Umbrella out, by the way?
No, I haven't. I have not. I'm gonna have to do that.
It's like Umbrella, UMBREL. It's like the first part of Umbrella. And man, it's super, super cool. Particularly as you're talking about this like sovereignty, this idea of sovereignty and being off the grid. And if you had your own generator, you could run your own node. And there's also like I meant to say this. There's the Iridium like Wi-Fi, so you can get like an Iridium Wi-Fi network. So if you had your own home generator and the little Iridium Wi-Fi broadcaster, you'd be totally self-service during a total grid shutdown.
Man, that's awesome. That is really cool. Huh. It's fun talking about all this stuff. It's fun, thinking of where this can go in the future. And I mean, again, the idea of like some sort of all-in-one package that some guy wants to buy just in case shit hits the fan and he wants to send Bitcoin, that'd be pretty cool. So, Any other like business topics you're up to that you want to mention before we put a cap on it?
I don't know. I think it's been an interesting time in my life where I faded away from like actively working at a Bitcoin company just at the start of the bear. Like literally as soon as the bull market started, I was like transitioning out. We didn't know that it was the full bull yet. Yeah. So it's been so weird, like not being not actively working 24/7 in it, but it has also been healthy for me. I think I've been able to invest more heavily in Bitcoin because it's hard to work in Bitcoin full time and also have the money and invest in Bitcoin full time. I think it's easier sometimes to work in something else and accumulate. It's kind of the Michael Saylor thing, where he's like running this serious enterprise company, but he's also able to just like totally change the way he's accounting for his business.
Yeah, he's mining fiat and putting it into Bitcoin. Yeah.
Hey, last thing, I had a question for you. Like you were in the Marines, is that right?
Oh yeah, I was. I definitely regret being in the Marines and joining, but yep.
Do you stay in touch with a lot of your old guys that you served with?
I do here and there some guys. I mean, not a whole lot, but I definitely keep in contact with some guys. And it's funny because a lot of guys that get out, after they get out, they definitely see the libertarian, peace side of the argument. Yeah.
I mean, I think there's also a lot of, I see a lot of Bitcoiners they have some military background. You might be interested in talking. I don't know if you're aware of Hector. Is it Rosencrantz? I always forget how to say his last name. He was on the team at Casa. I think he went to Annapolis. But if you're ever interested in talking to somebody else with the military background that has kind of joined and gotten into Bitcoin, I think he was at JP Morgan and saw the dark side,
Oh,
and then came
nice.
over to the light. But
Okay,
yeah, he
cool.
might
Yeah,
be a
I'd
good one
love
to talk
to.
to.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd love to check them out. And yeah, it's I like talking with like veteran Bitcoiner type people because they're interested in this stuff. They're
Yeah,
yeah.
a lot. There's a lot of. I think there are a lot of parallels there. So that I was just commenting because yeah, I noticed the trend there. You definitely see these trends after you've been in the space for a while, like of personality types and people with certain backgrounds. So it's really cool.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate it. Well, if you could maybe share your Twitter, how could we get in
Yeah,
contact with you? And
yeah. My Twitter is just my name at on Twitter. It's Nick Fogle. That's NickFogle. I don't tweet as often as I should. I'm one of these people that probably lurks more. But I do use Twitter as like signal, and I'm pretty hardcore about bookmarking. I hope they fix bookmarking so that I can get my tags and everything in there and don't have to export everything.
nice.
You can also read my blog at nickfogle.com. I've got a lot of writings there around business and Bitcoin and sovereignty and that kind of stuff.
I've checked out your blog. It's a great blog. You got a lot of really different, random, interesting topics on
Yeah,
there.
I got
Yeah.
nutrition and I've got business and I've got Bitcoin and all kinds of other stuff. So
Yep. Well, it was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you brainstorming with me and talking about the grid going down and how can we use Bitcoin in this situation. So, really nice to meet you, and thanks
yeah,
very much.
thanks for having me. This was great.
Cheers.